Good evening, folks. Yes, so I'm going to take up from Romans chapter 11 and see what we can do in terms of running through it. There's a lot of theology here. I could stay on Romans for years. There's so much stuff in here. So verse 11, I say then, they did not stumble so as to fall, did they? He's talking now about the Jews stumbling over the rejection of their Messiah. May it never be, but by their transgression, salvation has come to the Gentiles to make the Jews jealous. So it's almost like the God of Israel became the God of the Gentiles, right? And one thing, there's anything in this, folks, it is what I want you to get, is that, do you see how God works? Nothing is a threat to God. This is what I kind of want you to see in terms of being more broad-minded about God. So the Jews have rejected this coming Messiah, right? To God, this is, oh my word, this plan, it's gone to, oh my word, this plan is all messed up. No, look what Paul says. But by their transgression, salvation has come to the Gentiles to make them jealous. God has always got a contingency plan. There's no such thing about it goes bad for God. God just goes another way. God uses all of rejection, evil. Look how God used the evil of Joséf's brother. We need to get this guy to Egypt. How do we get him to Egypt? By his brothers selling him into slavery to get this man to Egypt. I want you to see in your daily life, if something doesn't go your way, don't worry. God has got so many ways. Has anybody ever seen, I'm sure, you've come to roadworks, right? And anytime they're doing roadworks, there's always a detour, right? It might be not as quick as the way you want it to take, but you'll get to that place. In other words, I've never ever, and I've lived and visited many, many different places, but I've never ever seen a detour that says, no, you can't go to your destination today, go home. No. No, it could be that detour may take longer, right, to get there, but you can get to your destination. That's how you have to see God, right? There are detours. This is a detour. It's not straight. Okay, really, the plan should have been Jesus comes, the Israelites receive the Messiah, but no, this now becomes, okay, I'll use this rejection to bring it to the Gentiles. And don't forget, clearly, this is not like a sprinkling of the Gentiles. The biggest faith in the world, of course, is Christianity. So now if their transgression is riches for the world and their failure is riches for the Gentiles, how much more will their fulfillment be? So he is talking about now that one day the eyes of the Jews is going to be open, and this fulfillment of the promise of a Messiah coming, some will receive it, not all, but some. But I am speaking to you who are Gentiles, and as much then as I am an apostle of Gentiles, I magnify my ministry. And this is a part of almost making the Jews jealous. Paul is talking about magnifying his ministry. If somehow I might move, listen, this is the jealousy, to jealousy my fellow countrymen and save some of them. For if their rejection is the reconciliation of the world, that's it right there. Talk about all things working together for good. Paul is actually saying, I mean, this is so huge, that Israel's only God can do this. Israel's rejection meant that God can reconcile the entire world. What will their acceptance be but life from the dead? If the first piece of dough is holy, the lump is also. And if the root is holy, the branches are too. So what he's saying right there, he's talking about, so the branches, so the root is the Old Testament patriarchs, right? And what he's actually saying is that these branches are Israel. So he's essentially saying that even though these branches are not bearing fruit, he has not, because of these Old Testament patriarchs, these Old Testament patriarchs are still planted. In other words, God hasn't kind of chopped down a tree and he's done with these branches. No, they are still connected. One day, these branches will bear fruit. Okay? So, because here's the thing, is that when God makes a promise, it's forever. And he always delivers. And who did he make a promise to? The Old Testament patriarchs. You know, God doesn't, well, you know, that was kind of a long time ago. Yeah, changed a little bit, you know, the economy, all of that stuff. No. God's promises transcend all of that. God's promises are not circumstantial, they're eternal. But if some of the branches were broken off and you being a wild olive were grafted in, this is talking about the Gentiles. God is talking about his plan now of grafting the Gentiles in among them and became a partaker with them of the rich root of the olive tree. These are the Old Testament patriarchs. Don't forget, you can say that even though we're not Jews, we've been grafted in and we're able to imbibe this spiritual nutrition from what these Old Testament patriarchs have planted. It's like a tree. It's almost like a tree, of course. The branches are benefiting from the roots in the soil and the trunk. That's us. We have been grafted in. Branches were broken off so that I might be grafted in. Quite right. They were broken off for their unbelief. But you stand by your faith. Do not be conceited, but fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, he will not spare you either. So he's talking now about to the Gentiles, don't be arrogant that you've been grafted in, right? Because certain branches, of course, have been cut off in terms of people who have totally rejected Christ. There were people around Christ at the time, clearly, that rejected Christ. Those Pharisees, and Jesus even said, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the Pharisees, you will not see the kingdom of God. Clearly, these were branches that were cut off. And what Paul is saying now, don't have this conceit, because also, you know, you lose your faith or fall away, you can be cut off. Do not be conceited by fear, for if God did not spare the natural branch, he will not spare you either. Behold then, the kindness and severity of God to those who fell, severity, but to you, God's kindness. If you continue in his kindness, otherwise you will also be cut off. So Paul is talking about here, persevering in God. And they also, if they do not continue in their unbelief, will be grafted in. Meaning now that they're cut off, if they come to faith, they'll also be grafted in. So fall away in unbelief, you're grafted out. Come to believe, you're grafted in. But if you were cut off from what is by nature a wild olive tree, and were grafted contrary to nature in a cultivated olive tree, how much more will those who are the natural branches be grafted in to their own olive tree? All he's really saying is that God has not done away with Israel. And I am going to finish this. For I do not want you, brethren, to be, and let me tell you something here as well. In fairness, I'm doing a survey right now, meaning a quick version of this. Because you can say Romans, you could stay in Romans forever, right? So a quick version. For I do not want you, brethren, to be uninformed of this mystery, so that you will not be wise in your own estimation. There are partial hardening as happened to Israel. God has hardened their hearts. I tell you, you reject anything of God, he hardens you. You accept anything, you accept the light of God, you get more light. And it happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And so all of Israel will be saved, just as it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion. He will remove ungodliness from Jacob. This is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. So God is still pursuing Israel, but the pursuit in its fullness is going to come after the Gentiles have been saved. From the standpoint of the gospel, they are enemies for your sake. And they are enemies. Of course, anybody who rejects Christ is an enemy of God. But from the standpoint of God's choice, they are beloved for the sake of the fathers. So they're beloved because of the promises he made, as I said, to these Old Testament saints. But the gifts and the callings of God are irrevocable. For just as you once were disobedient to God, but now have been shown mercy because of their disobedience, so these also now have been disobedient, that because of the mercy shown to you, they also may now be shown mercy. For God has shut up all in disobedience, so that he may show mercy to all. So Israel's disobedience has opened the gates for the Gentiles to come in. Oh, the depth of riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments, and unfathomable his ways. For who has known the mind of the Lord, or who became his counselor, or who was first given to him that it might be paid back to him again? For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be the glory forever. Amen. So I did do some racing through that, but that's the gist. That's the gist of it, essentially, because really, to go through a book like this, you can't do it what's called exegetical, for you'll be in there forever. But this is the gist. This is the gist of it, right? So God is using this rejection of Israel to bring salvation to the entire world. So the original plan of God was that Israel were given these oracles. Israel would be the evangelists to the entire world. But God has still kept all of his promises to Israel, right? Still kept all of his promises to Israel, right? And I mean, when you look at Israel's enemies throughout all of history, God has protected them, right? I mean, when was the last time that you had a conversation in a grocery store with a Philistine? You haven't. An Amorite, a Moabite. But he's protected this nation despite. I mean, really, when you actually say a persecuted group of people, nobody's been persecuted like the Jews. If you say, yeah, somebody has, you don't know history. Nobody's been persecuted like the Jews. But why is that? Who has been trying to destroy them? Satan. Why? Because if you destroy Israel, you destroy the promises of God, right? You destroy the promises of God. There's no other group of people you will read about in history where a ruler of the land has talked. Nowhere in history. The ruler of the land, destroy all the male children. You've never heard that. Yeah, there's a lot of evil people. I mean, everybody's had a civil war. Everybody's had some form of what we would call today genocide, but not for the purpose, right, of actually destroying the promises of God. This is what happened with Israel. And who did God preserve all of this culture in Europe, Eastern Europe, and in 1948, brought it all back together to this land called Israel. Who have you ever heard of that's had a 6-day war with 4 countries? Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan. This is all the trouble about the West Bank. 6 days war. 6 days war. It's been supernatural. Supernatural. How many down and out Jewish people do you know? Right? How many down and out Jewish people do you know? You go to London, there's a district in London, and it's one of the most glamorous places on the planet. You got to see these mansions, really. Owned, yeah, there's a lot of very wealthy aristocrat, children of the aristocrats, English, but there's also a lot of Jews. And these aristocrats, the difference is that they are from stock of 1,000, 1,200, 1,500 years. Many of these Jews have newly moved there since the Second World War, right? I mean, you look at most teaching institutions around academia, you will see a large concentration of Jews, right? Finance, banking. I remember when I used to be in the an investment guy, and anytime that there was a Jewish holiday, liquidity would dry up in the markets. There was a Jewish holiday, so any Jews would take the money out of the market. Where's the liquidity gone? The point that I'm trying to say, God has done this supernaturally. I'll bless those that bless you, and I'll curse those that curse you. Before Hitler, before the Second World War, England was the most powerful country on the planet. You know what England did? What they did, they said to Hitler, because they had a deal because Israel was colonized by the British at the time. And they had a deal at the time. The occupants of Israel at that time was the Ottoman Empire, which is essentially the Turks today. And they had a deal with, it's called the Balfour Decree, Lord Balfour, because England, a Jewish scientist called Clem Wiseman helped England win the First World War against the Nazis. And he asked, what do you want us to do for you? And he said, let my people go, give them this land. And this Balfour Decree, I think it's around 1917. I think the First World War ended around 1917. So around 1917, 1918. And this Balfour Decree was, we'll give you this land. But England also did a deal with the Egyptians and the Ottoman Empire, which was the Turks, which is essentially, no, you can stay in the land. And so initially, during the Second World War, Hitler just wanted the Jews out of there. And he wanted to send them to Israel. You know what England said to Hitler? This is at the time when they were still negotiating with Hitler. Don't let any more go. Don't let any more go. And that ultimately led to the final solution. And the superpower at the time, as I said, England became a shell of itself, really. Something else happened after that. There was Suez Canal crisis, and boom, England was no longer the superpower. At one time, England would do things without asking anybody permission. And then after that, Dwight Eisenhower was in power. And essentially, that's when America became the superpower. But until that time, it was Britain. The point being, God made a decree: I'll bless those that bless you, and I'll curse those that curse you. And essentially, Hitler was willing to let them, I just want them out of here. And it was when England said, no, don't let any more go, Goebbels and that motley crew came up with what's called the final solution. And that was to exterminate the Jews. And 6 million people died. And so I'm just saying now, all of that, because here's the thing that you got to do. You got to be able to trace things out of the Bible and see how God's hand is on people outside of this, because it doesn't stop when we close this, right? I mean, this ended in terms of the writing 1900 years ago. It would be silly to leave it there, because then people wouldn't see any relevance. Benjamin Disraeli, for a Jewish man to become prime minister of England during the Victorian era, the era of Queen Victoria and her husband, Albert, for a Jewish man who became so powerful, that's, you know what that story is like, Benjamin Disraeli? That's a Joseph story outside of the Bible, really. It is a Joseph story. The story of the Rothschilds from the ghettos of Frankfurt became one of the most powerful banking families in the world. What I'm saying is this, is that it shows God's promises still working in the lives of these Jews. I'll bless you, your seed, I'll prosper you. Some of the biggest philanthropists on the planet are Jewish. Jewish. And Bernie Madoff took a lot of money from a lot of those Jewish charities, and many of them are still incredibly wealthy. I say all of this just so that you can actually see that God made a promise to a group of people, and even though they were unfaithful, God is still faithful. Now, don't get me wrong, there are promises that God makes to people that he requires reciprocity, of course, for those promises. But this was this promise: I'll bless those that bless you, that he made to Abraham. Oh, Abraham, oh, your ancestors are not faithful. No, that deal's over. No, God doesn't do that. God doesn't do that. What should that do for you guys right now? You can put your trust in God. You can't put your trust in the news. You can't put your trust in people. Can't put your trust in figures and leader, but you can put your trust in God. You can take that to the bank. As I heard Jerry talking about, oh, yeah, God has been taking care of me. Of course, because he's promised this. He has promised this. You know, whatever your situation is now, you are struggling, I'm telling you, renewed faith in God. Renewed faith in God will do it. Renewed faith in God. God is a promise keeper. And don't worry if something that you expected to go a particular way didn't go your way. That doesn't mean it's not going to go. It's just not going to go your way, right? And so be open to new things that God is doing. Trust God, even when it seems like things are not working out. Things may not be working out according to your understanding. According to your understanding, I'm sure things are not working out for Joseph according to his understanding. He said, I haven't done anything and I'm in prison, but things were working out.